Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world. In 30 answers, discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I am in St. Helena at Clif Family Winery with winemaker Laura Barrett. Laura, welcome to Wine Soundtrack, and tell us about Clif Family Wines.
Hello. Clif Family Winery is located in downtown St. Helena. We have a wonderful tasting room here. And then we focus on many different varietals. So I source grapes from all over the Napa Valley, as well as Mendocino County, in addition to our 90 acres of estate vineyards, to make everything from rosé to Chardonnay, Viognier, Sauvignon Blanc, and then on the red spectrum, Grenache, Petit Syrah, a whole host of Cabernets from our estate program. And it's a wonderful boutique-style winery with an organic farm and a food truck that is parked outside of our tasting room. So we're very much a wine, food, and farming company.
I love that. So you covered that you have some estates and you're purchasing fruit. You have a wide variety of varieties that you work with. How many cases do you make?
We're bottling around 12,000 cases of wine each year now, but we grow in small increments because our business is mainly direct to consumer. Our annual increases are gradual, but we did just purchase a large vineyard in the Oak Knoll District, so I think we'll see a little bit of an uptick in the coming years.
Ooh, fun. So your first memory relevant to wine, do you remember what it was and how old you were?
Oh, definitely. My first memory was a trip to Napa. I'm originally from Massachusetts, so my sister was living in San Francisco. We came up for a day trip. We went to Hess Winery. I bought one bottle of something white. I can't remember what it was, but my memory is that I did not want to drink it. I felt that it was so special that I left it in the refrigerator for months and months and months, and I just remember staring at it thinking that I just couldn't possibly open it.
Did you ever open it?
I did.
And was it still good?
It was fine at the time. My palate was very uneducated and inexperienced, so I had no idea what I was drinking, but certainly not how things go anymore.
No. So prior to that, wine just wasn't a part of your life. But now wine is a part of your life, and your palate has expanded, I'm sure, immensely. I've tasted your wines. It clearly has. Is there a particular wine that was an aha moment for you, or one of many? Is there one that stands out of one of those wines you tasted where you just said, wow, like this changed my perspective on a grape or on a region or on maybe it made you make wine? I don't know.
Yeah, well, when people ask me about how I got into the wine business, I always say, well, I don't really have an aha moment wine. I don't have that wine that was my epiphany wine. But I think one that really sticks with me during my experiences traveling in New Zealand is from Craigie Range. It was called Block 14. And for me, it's the Syrah, Block 14 Syrah. And for me, it was one of the first wines that I had tasted that really I connected with the place. So it was like my first experience feeling and tasting and experiencing terroir. And it had the most black pepper I had ever smelled and tasted in a bottle. So that's probably just one wine that really stands out in my memory and experience early on.
So if we now came to your home and we saw your wine cellar, what would we find in there? How diverse is it?
Well, it's usually about where I've traveled. So I tend to obviously very much connect with the places that I've been. So I think on the forefront and in the front of the cellar is a lot of South African wine. So I just returned from a trip in South Africa and got to experience their wine country. So a lot of amazing, again, Syrah, a lot of great Chenin Blanc. So that's probably what's in the front.
What else would we find in there?
I have a lot of older wines that I've made. I always like to kind of look back on the things that I've made. So some old wines from Fisher Vineyards, which was one of my first winemaking experiences. A lot of New Zealand and Australian wines, because that's where I've traveled the most. And I think locally, I tend to, of course, drink a lot of Napa Valley Cab, but because it's on the forefront of everyone's minds, I'm often trying to branch out to other varietals. So love to drink Grenache, Syrah, a lot of the Rhone varietals, Viognier.
Yeah, you're an equal opportunist. I like that. So is there anything from your cellar that you opened recently that drank really well, whether it was young or old?
I had a 2003 Cabernet from Fisher over the holidays that is still on my mind. It was my first vintage working there, and it was from the Lamb Vineyard, which actually those vines have been pulled out and replanted since. And it was so beautiful. I was just so impressed at how youthful it still was, and a great example of some ripe Cabernet, but very well balanced Cabernet from Calistoga. And I feel like I can still taste it. It was so delicious.
So you've traveled a bit and spent time in other countries. Who do you think, which country do you think drinks the best in terms of quality or has access?
Oh, goodness. Well, most of my travels and experiences have been in the Southern Hemisphere, so I feel like this question would be, well answered with a lot of European tasting in mind, which I haven't traveled a lot in Europe. So I would have to say, let's see. They're drinking the. Can you say the question one more time?
Which culture or what country gets to drink the best in quality? Who do you think, after all your travels, has the best access to diversity of wines?
I would have to say, like a small town in probably any of the European countries like France and Italy and Spain, where they've been making wine for centuries, and their families for decades have been making wine in the basement, and they probably have just access to the most delicious local, almost like maybe not even widely produced wines. I picture like a jug coming out of the cellar somewhere. So, just real casual and family focused.
So do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
Oh, a perfect variety. I believe that wines are always improved through blending. So I would have to say no. I think that you can always take something that you think is perfect and add a little bit of this or a little bit of that to it and look at it blindly and be able to make an improvement on that base blend. We're always tweaking and adding little bits and pieces of other things. So I think the power of blending is really important, and we can always do better when we're working with other pieces of the puzzle.
Absolutely. So, speaking about perfection, a lot of people are aspiring to maybe what is unachievable, but one measure of that is a lot of times critics and scores. How do you look at critics and scores? What's your opinion on that?
I think they play a really important role in the perception of your brand to the public. Obviously, someone's picking up a magazine somewhere and reading, and when the score is high, they think favorably of you. I think it has less and less impact on sales as time goes on, because more and more people are digging deeper and tasting and buying wine because they like it and they've tasted it. So people now have more access to these wines and these smaller producers, and they're not relying so heavily on the scores, but they are really important. And I think the best, for me, the best value in some of these scores and publications is for people who are learning about wines. And when they want to sit down and buy a wine and read the tasting notes, it's a really nice way to say, hey, this is what one person thought about it. And you can read through the descriptors and kind of train your palate. I think that's a really probably underutilized, but a really powerful way that these publications can be used.
Well, so we talk about wine critics of having opinions, but in your opinion, red, white, or rosé?
Red.
Still or sparkling?
Still.
Very easy, see? And how do you approach, look, I just came from your tasting room, from the dining area where I sat and had some incredible food and wine pairings. I think that your chef is doing an incredible job taking your wines and pairing them with food. Really I mean, beautiful pairings. How do you approach food and wine pairing? As a winemaker, or as a wine drinker, I should say, what are you looking for? Are you looking for synergy? Are you looking for contrast? Do you follow rules? Have you made your own rules? How do you make the decision?
Well, I see food and wine pairing, and you already alluded to this, in two different capacities: a comparative experience and a contrast experience. And I think either way they can be amazing and delicious. So I think it's trial and error for me. I never really know if something doesn't work until I experience it. And so that's what Chef and I are doing when we're putting together our food and wine pairings for the tasting room, is to really sit down and hash it out. We've got to taste a little bit of that and a little bit of this. And then there's the inclusions and the additives. And if you put a little bit more lemon juice on the whatever you're eating, how does that change things? So I think it's really about experience. I don't think there's a right and wrong. I think a lot of palates are very different, but I think often something stands out that surprises me and says, oh, this absolutely does not work. Why? We can't really explain it, but it definitely is off the table. So it's really an experience-driven method in coming up with these food and wine pairings.
Absolutely. Well, I will say that you guys got it spot on with the cocoa nib beets and almonds with spice that went with the Zinfandel, and something I might not have thought of normally. And yet, Clif Family Wine introduced that to me and said, that's a good pairing, and it was extraordinary.
It is. I just sat through and did that food and wine pairing a few weeks back, and that is a bite that is difficult to explain for the staff on what it is and how these things come together. And then when you have the experience, like that's an example of what I was just talking about. You might think, oh goodness, this seems different. And then you taste it and it pairs beautifully together. So really, really nice work on Chef's behalf.
And on yours with the wines. So for somebody who hasn't had the pleasure to taste Clif Family wines yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
I think they're missing out on a lot. I could go on forever. Delicious wines that are very fruit forward, very balanced. I mean, my whites, I think, are very fruit driven. They're clean, they're crisp. They have great balance of acidity and alcohol. The red wines, we have this nice spectrum of weight and tannin and fruitiness. So you can get our Grenache that is very fruit driven with a little bit of kind of earthy tones to it, kind of on the lighter side with respect to tannin, all the way up to really, really big Howell Mountain cabs that belong in your cellar. And the whole food and wine tasting experience, we're not a tasting room where you're going to just belly up to the tasting bar and drink 4 Chardonnays and 3 Cabs. You're going to sit down and have a really nice experience with great hospitality and great food. So there's a lot of really wonderful and amazing reasons to visit Clif Family.
So if space aliens were to arrive now to your tasting room, which of your wines would you want to welcome them with or showcase Clif Family wine?
Ooh, space aliens. Let's see. I think we would have to just go straight for the big Cabernets. I would want to show them our portfolio of Howell Mountain cabs because they're the biggest and the best and the one absolute thing you should not miss.
I have one right now, so I'm not missing out on it. So you spend time in the vineyard and you're working with vineyards across many different regions. How much variation do you see vintage to vintage? Do you see a lot of commonality or do you see really big fluctuating differences from year to year?
Well, it really depends. The last few years we have been on, a pretty consistent pattern. We've had some challenges to deal with vintage to vintage, but I think it depends on the wine. I feel like some of the white wines, no matter what the vintage is, I have this aha moment at the end of harvest where I taste the wine and I say, oh, we did it again. And yes, this is it. We've arrived. We've made the rosé. And yes, it's super consistent and It smells and tastes very similar each year. But with the reds and especially the cabs, it's a little bit harder to manage the vintage, probably because the grapes are much more dependent on the weather patterns at the end of the season. And, we're worried about late season rain and now wildfires. And so
suddenly wildfires are like the concern of every year.
I know,
It's really...
I wish they were wildflowers.
Yes. So are there any signs or predictors you look for that are going to tell you what a vintage might be like?
Oh, there are so many along the way. I mean, it all starts with kind of the kickoff of bud break and is it early or is it late? And the weather patterns during bloom, which is what's happening right now. We need sunny, warm, consistent weather, no cold, no rain, no wind, because bloom will determine the quantity of grapes that are going to be on the cluster for the vintage. And then summer weather, summer heat patterns. Is it hot? Is it, if it's cool and consistent like 2018, it can be amazing. It's cool. A cool summer is not a bad thing. We're really, interested in heat spikes and then, of course, all of our farming decisions on top of that, how we're responding to those viticultural milestones or weather hiccups that we have during the season. What are we doing? Are we removing leaves? Are we thinning the crop a little more or a little less? So I think it's a very complex weave of decisions and experiences and Mother Nature that create that kind of final vintage evaluation.
And when you're spending time in the vineyard, or maybe this happens more when you're in the cellar with the wines, have you found yourself talking to the vines to coax them along, to encourage them, to reprimand them if they're not behaving? Or do you find that more in the cellar, that when it's in the barrel, there's a little more extra love or a little more parenting that goes on?
Yeah, I think the parenting definitely happens in the cellar for sure. I would say we're pleading with Mother Nature in the field, and then we're nurturing and raising our babies in the cellar for sure, playing music and singing to them. And
more music, more singing, or more talking?
Probably more talking, but we like to think that we're nurturing them and singing to them like babies.
I love it. Now, my experience in your tasting room is a really familial and team-oriented thing. Everyone was so friendly and felt like a family. Are there any rituals that you guys have started that you do at the start of harvest that you do as a team? Or maybe there's something you do as an individual to kind of kick off a new harvest that's about to begin?
Well, we always do the blessing of the grapes at the crush pad. That's definitely a cellar routine for sure. And oftentimes in my past experiences, we make our wine at a custom crush facility. I was always the first one on the crush pad. And so when you're that, you get to experience the blessing of the grapes and a glass of champagne at 8 o'clock in the morning. But here at Clif Family with our hospitality team and our culinary team and our sales team, we are definitely a family. And we do so much together as a team. I mean, Clif Family really hangs its hat on what we call our 5 aspirations, and that is sustaining our business, our brand, our people, our planet, and our community. So nurturing and sustaining and taking care of our people is a huge focus of what we do every day. So we're always together and we're always supporting each other. And I just think that common theme throughout the business is what you felt today in your experience on the tasting room. We're always supporting each other, and we're very well cared for by our leadership team and our owners. So it definitely, and Clif Family, we're definitely, it's in our name.
That's right. I love it. So when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I thought I wanted to be a doctor, and that's kind of how I got into wine. I thought I wanted to be a physician. I started college as pre-med, and my mom worked in medicine, and so I was always hearing about that. And then I took 2 years of really hard science classes and decided, oh no. But I was very well, well into the program, and decided I was determined to find a interesting and fun application where I could be outdoors and in nature. And that's how I discovered the wine business, kind of from an academic perspective. So But yeah, when I was little, I think I was more interested in medicine, taking care of people. And
Interesting. And yet the math and science, it kind of makes sense that you would find your way now into wine. When you're not working, how do you like to spend your free time?
oh, there's so much to do. Well, I have 2 children, so they keep me very busy. I love to go hiking, and I do a lot of yoga, and I think spending time with the kids is always top priority. So we're busy, and I love to cook. I'm always in the kitchen. I have this mild obsession with making things from scratch. So,
such as?
Such as pesto and pasta sauce and salsa and hummus and just all those things that you like that are easy to buy but more fun to make from scratch.
So if you're planning a romantic evening, what sort of wines make for a romantic evening for you?
I think it's always fun to start off with the sparkling wine. And I like to have, like, if I could have a half a bottle of everything, it would be great. I think pairing, as you experience in the tasting room, pairing a different wine with each course is really a wonderful experience, especially for a nice dinner. But certainly starting the evening with a bottle of sparkling wine or champagne and finishing it with a really delicious bottle of Cab and then a whole lot of things in between would be perfect.
Absolutely. So we all, are given advice throughout our lives, from when we're children to adults, from teachers, from mentors, from family. Is there a piece of advice that someone gave you along the way that you really like to apply to your life or maybe to your work?
I think the best advice that I got in my career, and I think this is applicable for everything in my life, is to really, when you start, you have to work really, really hard, and you have to keep working hard. And that means staying focused. And in the winery, and when people come to me and say, well, how do I start? How do I get involved in the wine business? You have to get those cellar jobs, and you have to work in the cellar, and you have to move wine and operate pumps and move hoses and drag hoses and roll barrels. Those things are so important. And that's just sort of the manual labor of working in the cellar and feeling the experience of working a hard harvest. My most memorable one was in Western Australia, and I worked 17 hours a day for, quite some time. And looking back, it was so important, and to learn really how to work physically hard. I think taking that through your entire career, and it changes as you get out of the cellar and into an assistant winemaking job or an enologist position or a head winemaking job. You're not always doing that physical labor, but when you understand it and you felt it and you've done it yourself, it's really, really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you look back at your career, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements so far?
I think, and it's on the forefront of our minds right now at Clif Family, is acquiring and planting our new vineyard in the Oak Knoll District. I think we've seen so many changes in my short time just here at Clif Family. I've been here for almost 7 years now, with the way that grapes are being sourced. And we had this amazing discussion that I look back on, and I said we really need this 40-acre parcel in Oak Knoll, and it was kind of a dream. It was kind of like, just throw it out there, and it happened. And that's really exciting, and we're going to see the first fruit off that vineyard this coming harvest in 2021. And so I think for my career, that is probably going to be a very pivotal, important, pivotal moment.
We'll have to meet up in like 10 years when you can look back and see what other milestones you've hit, but also be able to taste the wine 10 years from now, looking back on this moment when it's like, wow, this is a big, big step for you. So definitely. I'm excited.
Definitely. Thank you. I look forward to it. I'm really, really looking forward to this harvest for that and many other reasons. So
fun. So if you could give our listeners a piece of advice, what kind of advice would you give them about wine? I
think I always like to tell people to, go with what you like, open a lot of bottles, taste and drink, and figure out what your palate likes. And don't be afraid of wine. I think a lot of people are intimidated by wine. So I think for new consumers and new drinkers to explore and taste a lot of different wines, and read as much as you can and understand the industry. It's just a lot of fun. There's so much going on. There's so much interesting science, and then the pairing piece and all these magazines. There's so much to read and to understand. So keep exploring.
Well, we're going to have a little fun now with some fun questions and thoughts here. The first is I want you to complete the sentence for me. A table without wine is like...
An empty piece of slate.
Sure. Okay.
Oh, hope I'll get better at this.
Now I want you to imagine a situation. We're sitting at a table, a dining table. We've got the Clif family wines on it that you've made, and there's an empty chair. Who from any walk of life, living, deceased, famous, or not famous, would you like to be drinking a bottle of your wine that you could share with them?
Oh, right away that came to mind. I want my great-grandmother there.
Ooh.
Yeah. I was so lucky to grow up with 4 of my great-grandparents.
Wow.
And it would be just amazing to have her at the table.
Oh. I asked the question a long way, giving you time to think. That's why. So now I want to know, if you were being sent off to a deserted island, I'm sending you off to a deserted island. Let me clarify that. And you have to take 3 wines with you. Which 3 wines would you want to take?
Oh, goodness. Definitely the Clif family Rosé of Grenache. It's delicious and my favorite wine to make and to drink here. One of my favorite wines.
Which is why it's sold out.
Exactly. I would probably take a bottle of the Block 14 Craigie Range Syrah that I referenced earlier, because that's also delicious. And then, that final bottle of Cab, where does it come from? I would say a Chateau Margaux.
Ooh.
Why not?
I like it. So now we're going to play our little game I warned you about, where we're going to pair music with wine. I told you the last part is a little more fun. So I got to go through a tasting of your wines, and each one had different aromas, different flavors, and conjured up different feelings. And so if you can put them to a genre of music, a singer, a song, whatever you want. But while I did not get to taste your Rosé of Grenache, why don't you tell me about that one?
From a
Barrett, yeah.
From a musical standpoint. Oh, goodness. Sorry, I want to make sure I get this right. You'll have to edit this out.
Yeah. You want to pair, like, it conjures up, I'll ask the question again, but it conjures up a feeling and what that is. So let me start over.
Oh, I don't know if I have an answer for this. Goodness, this is too hard. Let me think for a moment.
You can do something as general as saying classical, disco, jazz, whatever, or you can say,
all right, I'm going to keep it super simple. James
Taylor or Beatles or Mozart. Okay. Whatever comes to mind.
Okay. Grenache.
I'll give you a chance to think, and then
So I love it. First, for me, like what just came into my mind is the sound of music.
Oh, okay. The hills are alive.
The sound of music. Okay. Because it is. It's so alive in the mountains.
And then just kind of go from there.
You kind of think of a meadow, right? Because it's just so fresh and free and.
Okay, I'm going to start the whole.
Should I use that?
Use whatever you want.
Okay.
Nobody knows she's here.
Yeah,
I'm starting it over.
All right.
So now we're going to come to the fun part of our chat, where we talk about wine and music. Wine conjures up an emotion in us. When we drink wine, we have different sensations, whether it's the environment we're in, the weather, the food, whatever it is. A white wine gives us a different feeling than maybe a red wine. And music does the same thing. So I want you to pair some of the wines I mention to you or call out with music. It can be a genre, it can be a specific song. It's whatever you think that you'd want to be listening to while you drink this wine or it makes you think of. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Let's start with your favorite rosé of Grenache.
Okay, that wine would have to be paired along with the soundtrack to The Sound of Music because it's so fruity and vibrant, and I won't sing for you, but
You sing for your wines. Why won't you sing for us?
never. But alive.
Okay. What about your Grenache?
My Grenache is a little more earthy. It has a lot of bright fruit, but it has this real earth core to it. So that would have to be something a little bit more somber. I'm thinking, I think I would probably go like some slow country music for that.
Ooh, okay. I can get that. I was drinking that. Mm-hmm. And then I want to focus on two wines. You have your Zinfandel and the Cabernet, and describe them because they're each of the owner's favorites, and I don't want to misspeak in describing how great these two wines are.
So the Gary's Improv is named after our owner, Gary Erickson, who plays improvisational trumpet. So that's the answer for that one. Mm-hmm. You have to have Gary playing
his own
two
music.
trumpets at the same time on the stage at our summer solstice concert with the Clif Bar Band.
Does he really play two trumpets at the same time?
He does. Improvisational trumpet. Yes.
Wow.
And then so that wine is Howell Mountain appellated, and it is a very concentrated, dark, beautiful Zinfandel that comes from the mountains, so it has high elevation and great acidity. The Kit's Killer Cab is named after our co-owner Kit Crawford. And that name comes from, of course, their first blending experience where they sat down at the table making their very first Clif family cab, and she, pushed her favorite glass aside and said, "This one's killer," and the name stuck and has been with us ever since. So for that wine is, because it's Howell Mountain, again, it's intensely concentrated. But it has this elegance and finesse to it. That I would have to go probably something classical for that wine because that's what it is. It's classic.
Well, thank you. I won't push you on more. You have so many more wines, and I'd love to do it, but we're running out of time, and I'm letting you off the hook. But I do have one more question with a two-part answer. So the first question is, what winemaking region in the world is at the top of your list to explore?
Right now, I am planning to go to South America. Ooh. And we have some family in Santiago in Chile, and so I'd love to go to Mendoza, and we are making, just across the border, of course, we're making Malbec for the very first time, so Argentinian Malbec is on the forefront of my travel plans.
Ooh. Ooh. And on the flip side, if someone is planning a trip up here to Napa, how can they visit you and tell us a little bit about the experience?
Sure. We have an amazing tasting room right here in downtown St. Helena on Main Street. And we have all types of ways to experience our wines. You can come and sit down and do a formal wine pairing experience. So we pair 3 of our wines with 3 food bites from our chef. We also have a cycling-friendly experience where you can come and start your day with a Clif Bar and a coffee. We send you out on an amazing little bike ride around town, and then you come back and have lunch and a tasting experience. Fun. Or you can come and have lunch from our food truck and order a bottle of wine and sit on our patio. And if you're interested in any of those things, you can visit our website at cliffamily.com. And all of the experiences are well described there as well.
Well, it's been great talking to you, Laura, and it really is special here. The tasting room, the food pairings, food and ingredients and spices coming from your farm, also available for purchase. I think I'm going to go shopping now. But it's a really wonderful experience. I can't recommend it enough to everyone. It's been a great way to get to know Clif Family Wines and to get to know you. And thank you so much for joining us on Wine Soundtrack.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.